we'll get to the important things. The reason why you come to the banquet is to hear our wonderful speaker. Alan Lehto is the Director of Project Planning for TriMet's. He's going to talk about what is in store for Portland. If you think all these lines that you've already written on this trip and before is everything, you're going to get some great new information. But before I introduce Alan, I want to recognize Gerald Fox, who was our speaker in 1992. That was just really after what we now call the eastern end of the Blue Line out to Gresham opened. And basically, Gerald was Mr. Light Rail for Portland because you had a bus system here, and Gerald was the first engineer that TriMet hired, and a lot of his thought went into the original system. And basically, Alan is following in his footsteps, and he's carrying the torch for light rail in Portland. He's been here 11 years. Before that, he was in the consulting game, has been manager of corridor planning before he became the director of project planning. So it's his job to put together everything that's needed to create new lines. And I'd like to introduce him right now, and he'll talk about what he's going to be presenting.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Portland. I hope you're enjoying it here. Yeah. If you are, please be sure when you go home, don't tell anybody. You might be here, but we don't want to be quite as crowded as New York or places that folks are from. I'm going to try. There we go. Right. I'm going to try this out. Nice. I'm going to try this out and see if it works. I'm a control freak, so I like to have control over my presentation here. And talk a little bit about TriMet's, how we're doing now, how things look, and then some of the projects that are coming up in the future for us. We have been extraordinarily successful, I think, in the past 15 years in developing new lines, and we plan to try to continue to do that. We've got a lot of competition around the country in terms of doing that, and we're doing our best to keep at least a half a step ahead if possible. A few things to point out. Let me just make sure this thing's working okay. One of the things we're proud of is that we have a very efficient, very effective service as well, and a very popular and very well used service, especially considering the size of our metropolitan area. So up here you see we're about the 25th largest region in the U.S. And yet our rides per capita for the year is 7th. We're right up there with Chicago and Philadelphia. Now you see a little bit of part of that is because of the amount of service we put out there, but it's also because we're really relevant to the community. We do our best to be available on weekends, on evenings, throughout the day in a way that a lot of systems just aren't able to or haven't had their commitment to. A few other numbers here first before I get into some of the other pieces. This is the ridership by service area, and it's arrayed from the left side, the smallest service area, to the right side, the largest service area. And here we are. Let's see if this is working there. No, not good enough to bother. Here we are in the yellow, doing very well compared to where we are and compared to our peers. Boardings per resident, again, one of the highest, and certainly the highest among our peers. And that's important in terms of the relevance. It's also important in terms of the support from our public. So we do an annual survey, just like most systems do. And 8% of the people say, yeah, we approve of what you're doing and we want you to continue to expand your rail service. And part of that is because everybody, much more than 50% of the region, rides at some point during the year. even if that's just to go to a Blazers game or to a Rose Festival. Our annual revenue hours per resident is pretty high, but not that much higher than everybody else. And our expenditure is not the highest, so it's not just that we're putting all the money into it, it's that we really are digging down deep and getting as many rides as possible from as many different kinds of folks as possible. These are all system numbers, and it's for 2008. Boardings per revenue hour, one of the highest in the system, or in the nation. Weekend boardings, the very highest of our peers, and again, that's important to show how we're sort of providing service to a number of different people. And then on the flip side, we're very proud of the fact that we're able to provide the service without spending a lot of money on it. We're very efficient for the size and the level of demand, one of the lowest cost per boarding ride for a system. Same with per revenue mile, though in some ways our tight urban growth boundary and the fact that Portland is becoming denser over time means that we don't have to provide quite as much in terms of mileage. We're providing a lot of rides without having to carry people quite as far. And then our cost per revenue hour is one of the best. I don't know what San Diego is doing, but I want to find out. And what this means, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of our policy and our planning approach too, but what that means is exceptional benefits to the region as well. So these are 4 trends, and you think about how these are going, they ought to go in a certain way, and they are doing that for our region. One, in the 10 years that we had the data available from 97 to 2007, our ridership went up 45%, but our service levels only went up 17%. So we're getting more efficient as we grow. Our population went up 20%, but our daily vehicle miles traveled, that is the amount of time that people have to spend in the car and the number of miles that people have to drive to get their basic needs met, didn't grow as fast as population. We're one of the very few places in the country where that's true. And we can brag about a few things: travel and leisure is America's best city, popular science. Condon Nast talking about the great airport back service. We were the West Coast first train to the plane. We like to brag about it in 2001. And we also have some sort of technical back of house expertise in terms of being the very first transit system that Google came to when they wanted to do Google Transit. And I already mentioned this, our success translates into support, thankfully, in terms of the overall job improvement. You can see on the right, our riders really like us, and even our non-riders like us, because everybody knows somebody who rides. And we have about 2/3 plus of truly choice riders. And some people who say year after year that they don't own a car because they can get along with all of their needs on TriMet. This is a very small graph, so I apologize. Maybe some of you can see it, but it's basically a graph of ridership over time from about 2004 to about 2010. And each line has a little bit of growth to it, but what's important is that each of those lines has maintained that growth as we add new lines. So that very first line that we talked about, the Gresham line from 1986, is part of the blue line on the top. Added the Hillsborough line. And that's in the 64,000 a day average range. Our red line is the next highest line at the airport, but it also happens to go to the west side to Beaverton, and that's about 24,000. Our green line, which just opened last year, Clackamas, you'll see that line when you go on the streetcar production facility tour. And that's right about 20,000, which is a little under, but then so is employment and everything else we expected. And then our interstate line, simply because it's the shortest line and doesn't have as well a defined end point, is around 15,000. I mentioned this, but I like to really kind of hammer it home. Our role as a transit facility provider transit service provider, is very much wrapped in with what the vision is for the region. So we want, like every other transit system, to have as many rides as possible, as efficiently as possible. But that's not all we want. We're part of the regional consensus about delivering a region that looks like we want it to. Some of you, maybe all of you, have heard about the urban growth boundary we have that tries to protect the farms and forests that are outside the city and densify the city and the centers to make sure that that continues to happen over time, and we continue to have part of what makes Oregon, Oregon. It is Oregon, not Oregon. And the story goes that in the 70s, there was a Republican governor who was flying from Portland to our state capital in Salem, and there was a new suburban development that had just leapfrogged the Willamette River. And he saw that and envisioned the possibility of mountain to mountain and river to the end of the Willamette Valley being completely covered in suburban development. He had this great quote that, of course, I can't remember at this moment, that sprawling suburbia, ravages of cul-de-sac neighborhoods. And we're part of the solution for not doing that, putting service where it helps the city work best and helps our development go the way we want it to. We have a 5-year plan that sort of lays things out in terms of how we do the implementation, and that 5-year plan focuses on some basic important elements. One is the total transit system, the total transit experience. That is, if we want to get a lot of people riding, we need to be as comprehensible and understandable as possible and lower the barriers to riding. The second is to expand high-capacity transit, which is a lot of what I'll be talking about later. The third is to expand frequent service, and that is frequent service on our bus lines. We find that that's the most efficient bus service, and that's the bus service that starts to provide some of the benefits that rail does. Just starts to, but at least starts to. And then improving local service. We have great customer information. You can call up from anywhere at our 7,000 bus stops and MAX stations and find out when the next bus or train is coming right away. Our MAX light rail, which I'll talk a little bit more about, obviously, we have about just almost 53 miles of line now as of last September, 72 stations, and about 120,000 boarding rides between all of the 4 colored lines. This is a photo of our Type 4 Siemens car on the mall, which if you've been wandering around downtown, this is right in front of Pioneer Courthouse. You can see that. Our frequent service, I mentioned our frequent service bus lines, 12 lines that span the region, provide service 7 days a week that's frequent enough that people can actually build their lives around it and not have to have a car. And our standard service, which fills in the rest of the gap, and of course our paratransit lift service rides. We are, as the 25th or so largest region, we do not have the kinds of development pressures that a New York or a Boston has. However, we are doing the best we can to get the kinds of transit-oriented development that makes sense over time. We're proud to say that we have over $8.4 billion worth of development investment around our light rail stations. Portland streetcar is an important part of the overall mix. TriMet is a partner in providing streetcar service, but we are not the only part of it. It's a partnership with the City of Portland and a nonprofit called Portland Streetcar Inc., and I think you'll hear more about that on the streetcar tour. And a fun little addition is the aerial tram, which goes from the south waterfront, the tall towers just south of downtown that you see, going up to the Oregon Health Sciences University.